Secretary Kennedy for, I learn something every time I listen to Undersecretary Kennedy. Let me just say, I'm so glad to be with you all today. And part of the reason I'm really glad to be with you today is because I suspect it's been a pretty long time since the Assistant Secretary for the Western Hemisphere was the plenary speaker. So I'm pretty excited about that. We don't usually get the big room. First I want to say it, and I was reminded as I walked into the room, but I think the whole day today will be suffused not only with the memory of colleagues lost, but also solidarity and support for our colleagues in Nepal, both American and LES. And I know that we've worked in WHA to try and support not only our colleagues in Nepal and the FSM Relief Fund, but also to support our colleagues in SCA and CA and the bureaus around the building that are supporting the work that's going on there right now. Let me talk a little bit about what's going on in the Western Hemisphere and leave as much time as I can for questions, since I'm not going to talk about Cuba the entire time. The president, when he came into office and went to the 2009 summit in Trinidad and Tobago, which he did very soon after taking office, talked about building a policy around equal partnerships in this hemisphere that had no junior or senior partner, but had equal partnerships. When he ended the summit in Panama just recently, sort of his bookends in a way in his tenure, he felt very strongly and comfortably that we had delivered on that commitment. And I think you'll see that throughout my comments. But the fundamental building block of those equal partnerships is the focus on democracy and human rights, the focus on building partnerships with democratic countries and working towards democracy in countries that are not yet there. That can be done in many ways far more easily in this region than many others in the world, save Europe. And we have a base on which to build that I think is growing stronger in this hemisphere with some notable exceptions. The basic premise under which we build those partnerships are really built around inclusive growth and prosperity, education and innovation, cleaner, smarter energy growth, and citizen security, democracy, and good governance. So I'll talk about each of those just a little bit with reference to specific areas. When we talk about economic prosperity, we focus on the fact that in this hemisphere, nearly half of U.S. produced goods are exported to this hemisphere. Our trade with the hemisphere is 3 times what we export to China, Japan, and India combined, which is not a very well recognized fact as we spend so much time focused on Asia because of the growth in those exports, and that's understandable. But our trade with this hemisphere is enormous and has been growing as middle classes grow. We have more free trade agreements in this hemisphere than anywhere else in the world, and it's my job to spend a lot of my time waving my arms and jumping up and down and saying, remember that 4 countries, 5 with ourselves, in the Trans-Pacific Partnership are in the Western Hemisphere. As we look towards building a more competitive North America, which we've spent a lot of time doing over the past couple of years, we know that the competitiveness of the United States itself rests very much on the continued and sustained growth in the Western Hemisphere. But we also know that in the 80s and 90s, many of the countries in this hemisphere got their macroeconomic house in order and took many of the hard decisions that were necessary to sustain growth, largely commodity-driven in the last decade or so. Growth rates that were 6 and 7 and in some cases 12%. And so those numbers looked very good and pulled millions, 70, 80, 100 million people out of poverty and into the middle class. But as commodity boom recedes, we know that what it leaves behind is completely unsustainable both for that newly middle class and will never pull the people who did not make it in, and there are large pockets of poverty still left, into the middle class unless we have a much more inclusive growth than has been the case thus far. And so we focused on trying to promote that more inclusive growth through initiatives like the Small Business Network of the Americas, La Idea, which is an entrepreneurship initiative, the Women's Entrepreneurship of the Americas, Pathways to Prosperity's Innovation Challenge. You can see the theme here in terms of small business and entrepreneurship. One example I'll give you is Juliana Mejia from Colombia, who started her leather handbag business when she was participating in We America's training in 2012 and worked with champions and local partners, including the Chamber of Commerce in Colombia. And her company's gone from selling 100 handbags a year to selling 300 per month, increasing her revenue by 2,000% and doubling the size of her workforce. It's Juliana Mejia who we want to replicate and clone basically all over the hemisphere. In education, we know that this is a fundamental building block in this hemisphere. Studies around the world of the top 100, 200, sometimes even 500 of the best higher educational institutions in the world rarely have any Latin American or Caribbean institutions on them. The top one is the University of Sao Paulo, and it comes in somewhere below 200 in the world. You can't sustain the kinds of growth and movement into the middle class that Latin America and the Caribbean has seen unless education is strengthened. And so we have worked very hard to promote the 100,000 Strong in the Americas initiative, working on educational exchanges, trying to partner institutions in the United States with those in the region. But the most important part of that growth has to come from different schools that have partnered in the past. We know that four-year universities have got good, strong programs. But if we don't focus on community colleges and vocational and technical training with the Polytechnicos in Mexico and the newly emerging technical training schools around the hemisphere, we're missing a whole group of students for which K-12 will not be enough, but they won't go to, nor do they need or should go to four-year universities and get sociology and anthropology degrees, much as I love those, and end up driving taxis. Energy. We know the energy map has shifted largely to the Western Hemisphere. Growth in both fossil fuels and renewables has boomed in the Western Hemisphere, and that's a huge opportunity, especially for North and South America, to play a huge role in energy policy in the future and to do it right, sustainably, and with respect for the environment. But we also know that in Central America and the Caribbean, they're paying somewhere between 5 and 10 times the price for energy as the rest of the region, and they will not be energy sustainable or self-sufficient for a long time. And so we work with our North American partners especially to work on reducing costs, diversifying energy in those places, and promoting renewable energy. On security, we've spent a lot of time in the last few years focusing on Central America, the Caribbean, and especially Mexico through the Merida Initiative. I think most people will agree that Colombia and Plan Colombia has been a very strong success. And there are a lot of people looking at the lessons of that. But what we need to do now is make sure that as we work in Mexico, and as we know what has worked in Colombia, we don't leave out the isthmus in between, where the institutions are much weaker and the private sector has not been part of the equation. And that's why the new Central American strategy is focusing much more comprehensively beyond just traditional security, focused on police, military, or even the court system, to look at governance and institutions, accountability, transparency, and impunity, as well as the issues of prosperity, because we want to give the 6 million young people who will enter the workforce over the next 10 years an option other than emigration north or entry into gangs or cartels. On Cuba, I'll get to Cuba briefly at least. There obviously was a major change in our policy on December 17th. The president felt strongly that while things had not changed nearly as much in Cuba as we would have liked, and we don't expect them to right away, our own policy needed to change if we wanted to have a more effective way of helping the Cuban people. The policy is not based on an expectation that the Cuban government has changed or will change rapidly. It's based on an expectation that we can more effectively support the Cuban people, both in growing entrepreneurship and in getting information to them, and in supporting their democracy and human rights goals if we do so in a different fashion. And it's based on the premise that we had isolated ourselves from the ability to work with our neighbors by the policy that we had undertaken in the last 50 years. And so one of the most exciting things that we are doing, I think, is enabling those 500,000 plus emerging private sector entrepreneurs and the 200 plus jobs that have been approved for private entrepreneurship in Cuba to get the supplies they need and to be able to begin to create the businesses that they need to in Cuba. Cuban entrepreneurs have said to me that they are unfortunately dependent on what they call El Mercado Samsonite, what they can bring in their suitcases from the United States. And so what we're trying to do is help that unreliable and very small ability to support themselves, because the state does not help them, in a way that is more sustainable, more regular, and more supportable by private sector support from the United States to those businesses in a more reliable fashion. In Colombia, I think we have one of the most extraordinary processes going on right now, which is President Santos' attempt to end 50 years, the longest running civil conflict in the region. There have been a lot of ups and downs in that process, and there will be going forward. But it is surely worth the effort to support him in doing so and see whether Colombians can finally have peace. The FARC has been degraded to such a degree through the efforts of first President Uribe and now President Santos that we believe and we think that Colombians believe that it's time to end the war. But this is something that's going to be very tricky going forward. And we will give him our support with a special envoy that the Secretary has appointed, Bernie Aronson, one of my predecessors, as we look forward to the day when Colombians can live in peace. You've all seen the stories coming out of the most recent Summit of the Americas. I think that we all saw a historic meeting with Raul Castro. That was obviously a very important part of the summit, but I also think that among the most important parts of this summit were the fora that were not governmental. One of the most important things in this summit was the civil society forum, the ability for civil society activists to speak directly to leaders, and to do so despite the fact that there were Cubans and Venezuelans who tried to prevent members of civil society from participating in that forum. And we saw leaders in Latin America push back against that kind of intolerance of the free flow of ideas. That has to become a regular mechanism so that leaders can be held to account. President Obama had a roundtable with individual civil society leaders from around the hemisphere, including the U.S., along with Uruguayan President Tabaré Vázquez and President Solis of Costa Rica. I think that, along with the private sector forum, the education forum, the youth forum, makes it clear that the leaders talking among themselves is very important, but the leaders talking to the people to whom they are accountable is actually more important than these summits. So we're hoping that is a model for the future in the summit as well. So let me end there, thinking that we are, on the whole, in a good place in the Americas, again, with some notable exceptions that we can talk about. Venezuela, obviously moving forward, and some places that are going through some very tough times, Brazil, Argentina. But we also believe that there has been a renewed commitment to some of the principles that undergird this hemisphere that are going to continue to make these more capable partners our allies on global issues for the future, whether those are climate change or peacekeeping or other areas in which we need the support of these partners beyond the hemisphere. So thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions.